Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Improving Retail Plant Quality for Better Sell-Through, presented by Profile Growing Solutions. I'm Robin Sittberg of Meister Media Worldwide, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. We will have time for some questions at the end of the webinar, so if at any time during the presentation you'd like to ask a question, just type it in the question pane at the lower left corner of your screen and click Submit. You can do this at any time during the webinar, and we'll answer questions at the end. But before we begin, I'd like to introduce our speaker. Brandon White is an applied R&D scientist for Profile Products. He specializes in plant nutrition, which spans all Profile Products business units, including horticulture, golf, environmental solutions, and sports fields, but he focuses primarily on horticulture. Prior to joining Profile Products, Brandon obtained a master's degree in soil science from Louisiana State University, and he has served in various technical roles in horticulture and agriculture, both in industry and academia. So now I'd like to turn things over to Brandon.
All right, good deal. Thanks, Robin. Appreciate the introduction. As Robin said, my name is Brandon White. I've been with Profile for about 2 years. We started this research about the time I started, so I have about 2 years worth of research to get through today, so quite a bit to cover in a short amount of time. We've had a great team kind of all over. We've got our core R&D team and greenhouses and lab up in Condover, North Carolina. So that's where a lot of this research took place. Lots of people have gone into this research. Just want to shout out to them and many things. I just get to be the one to present it to you today. So with that said, like I said, we got a lot to get through, so we'll jump right in. So improving retail sell-through with Profile Growing Solutions. So we're talking about shelf life, and you may or may not have heard about the concept of shelf life and what that means. We're gonna talk about kind of defining what that is, and then what is the issue, right? So the first part of this could be kind of a review, kind of setting things up. A lot of this will sound familiar. Then we'll kind of jump back into the core research that we'll be presenting. So this is all taking place in the age of pay by scans, right? So our big box stores, as a grower, if you're selling into these big box stores, those plants, if you send 100% of the plants you send, they're likely all not going to get sold. And so what plants don't get sold, we would call that shrink. So shrink are simply plants that don't get sold or get returned, right? And shrink costs the grower money. The opposite side of shrink would be sell-through. So we want more sell-through. We want to reduce shrink. Overall, just as an industry average, and while these things apply to any plants sold into the retail space, we're going to focus mostly today on the greenhouse segment, and even furthermore, bedding plants, so annuals and perennials. So within that space, kind of industry averages, we're looking at 15% shrink and 85% sell-through. So as a grower, you maybe have a little better numbers than that, maybe a little bit less. Maybe you're right there in that 85-25 or 85-15 mark. But and so that's shrink, right? What causes shrink? A few different things, right? We've all been in the retail stores. They've got a shady section. They've got a highlight section. Generally that's probably managed pretty well, but that's not always perfect, right? You might end up with some plants who prefer to be in sunnier locations in the shade, and that can cause stress. You run into things like that. You can have disease that can be maybe carryover from production that kind of plays out in the retail space, or you may have disease as a secondary thing from other stressors within the retail space. But two of the big ones that are very impactful that we feel as a company we can help growers kind of mitigate or guard against would be water availability and nutrition, or a lack of water and lack of nutrition, right? We are likely never going to get to 100% sell-through, right? These are live goods we're talking about, and so we're not trying to stand up here today and claim that we can get 100% sell-through and you'll never lose a plant in retail. The retail space is just a stressful environment for plants, right? It's not the most ideal growing conditions. As a grower, you've got really tight control over things, and then you're sending these plants off into the world, and they may or may not be taken care of really well, right? So we're probably, if you're a grower, you're probably familiar with some sort of situation as pictured here. We hate to see this, right? We hate to see plants being thrown away in the dumpster or on that discount sales card, right? Looking like half dead, half alive. I was just at one of the box stores recently with one of my daughters, who's 7, and it was a little before the Kentucky Derby. We were having a Kentucky Derby party, and we were there to buy mint for some mint juleps, and we're outside, and I'm in Florida, and so it's late April, so it's really hot outside, right? And we're at the vegetable and plants outside in the middle of the day, and so we're looking, and overall plants look really good, and without any prompting from me at all, my 7-year-old looks up at me, and she sees a tray that had obviously gotten missed with watering, and the plants are like laid over on themselves and looking pretty crummy. And she looks up at me and she says, "Dad, who would buy these plants?" And I'm like, boom, that's it. That's the whole deal, right? Like she gets the concept here. And so that's really the crux of what we're talking about today. Again, looking at just defining this market size, that just annuals and perennials within this space, based on the most recent data we have that's collected, this market is worth, their segment of the market is worth $3.6 billion. And so if you just apply to simple math, apply 15% of that, that's over 500 million, an estimated $500 million that the industry is leaving on the table because those plants didn't get across the cash register and get scanned. So shelf life, what's the goal here, right? We kind of know what the problem is now. We've talked about that. Shelf life is, again, that time frame, the duration those plants are holding quality and remaining saleable in that retail space. So we want to increase that shelf life. Shelf life has been, it's not a concept that we invented, of course. It's a concept that people have tried to improve. It's hard to kind of quantify, right? Because people are buying plants as a consumer. It's pretty subjective. Like you're buying a plant based on how pretty that plant looks, how good it looks, right? And you want it to look good in your environment that you're buying it for. And so that can be kind of hard to measure. But so for the sake of these studies and in our work with shelf life, we kind of define plant quality as like a deep foliar tone, dark green looking leaves, and then a strong bloom count, right? We want to see nice looking flowers. We want to see this dark green foliage. There's other things that play into that, like canopy size and that, but we're focusing on those parameters. And then we want to protect that retail plant quality. So we want to extend that sales life. We want to attract customers. We want to make more sales. We want to extend that sales window. So our goal is improving retail plant quality and thereby reducing shrink, increasing sell-through. And all of this, if you include or think about sell-through and increasing that, that is contributing to the grower's bottom line, right? Most, if not all growers have some shrink factor built into their numbers, right? So if you increase your sell-through, you can directly impact that bottom line. So what's the solution? I've already kind of mentioned this, or at least alluded to it, but maintaining and protecting plant quality at retail. But the how is what we're going to focus in on today, and that's by providing sufficient nutrition and sufficient water, all under the premise that healthy plants are going to tolerate stress better and healthy plants are going to sell better. I always think about the analogy of humans, which I am one and you likely are too. If you take care of yourself and you drink enough water, you eat the right foods, you exercise regularly, your body is going to mitigate stress better. You're not going to be perfect. You're still human. You're still going to get some things from time to time, but overall, you're going to mitigate stress better and just have a better quality of life. Plants are no different. So you can see from left to right here in the pictures, but the left side here, these plants don't look terrible, but you can definitely see some nutrient deficiency and nitrogen here. On the lower left side, overall, these plants just don't have as great a foliar tone. But then the plants on the right, just a really good looking set of plants, like really great vibrant flower color, really good leaf color. So we've kind of got this two-pronged approach, right? We've got nutrition and then we've got water. So we're going to talk a little bit of a primer on nutrition first, and then we'll talk about water. So nutrition, continuous liquid feed systems, or CLF, you'll hear me refer to that a lot. That's just regularly feeding plants with your irrigation with water-soluble fertilizers, right? It's a very common approach to crop production across the board, and then particularly for the greenhouse space, right? Lots of benefits for that in production, but the biggest downfall for the conversation today is that CLF systems do not provide sustained nutrition to plants in the retail space or post-production. So you'll hear me kind of use those interchangeably. But I just want to point out here that when I say retail or post-production, we're really talking about, we've got this production phase, right? And then we've got the retail space and getting those plants sold. We also want to think about that consumer experience piece, right? Growers, our consumers can, in most places, can return plants, but we want them to be happy and satisfied with that purchase, and we want them to keep coming back and buying more plants, right? That's good for our industry. So just know that when I'm saying retail space, I may be using those interchangeably, but we're also talking about that consumer experience piece. And so controlled release fertilizers, if you're not super familiar with them, or abbreviated CRFs, these are simply prilled water-soluble fertilizers, dry granulated fertilizer that's encapsulated fully with some type of polymer coating. That technology can differ, but it's fully coated, and then that is designed to release with the nutrient needs of the crop and designed to be with one application. So for really long-term crops, you can come back and top dress with CRFs as well, but especially for today's conversation, we're focusing on the benefits of this with one application. Some more things about CRFs. The release is dictated by temperature and moisture. As you know, CRF companies, we're a company who sells CRFs. We're alike in that we like to show these graphics to kind of explain how our technology works. But so this gray part here would be your nutrient core, so your prilled dry fertilizer. That then is encapsulated with the polymer, and you have these tiny little micro pores you can't see with the naked eye. But you've got water, and water has to come into this pearl and work its way through these tiny little channels, contact that dry pearl, and you get nutrients then into solution, and then those ions, those nutrients work their way back out of that pearl, and that's driven, it's diffusion that's driven by temperature and moisture that again matches the needs of that crop. So the CRFs largely are available in a variety of longevities, all the way from 70, 90 days to some smaller or lower longevities, all the way up to 365 days. We even have some technology that goes well above that, more like 500 and 700 days for some unique situations. But typically you're somewhere between 70 and 90 in a full year. The type of polymer or that coating technology can differ. You can have different multiple release patterns. And what I mean by that is, outside of your longevity, you can have like a standard release profile where it's going to release at kind of the same rate initially to mid-crop and then at the end, or you can have a technology that's got more of like an S-curve where it's slower in the front end and then it ramps up and then it kind of tailors off again. So if you've got a situation where you've got a long-term crop per se and you want to use like a 270-day or a 360, but you want that crop to still start off really fast and not have this lag time that can be common with longer release products, you can have what's called a staged product. And so that can be sort of like an initial package of fertilizer, like granular fertilizer that's not coated, but to get that it's still coated in our technology, and you can get this early release and then still get into your longer term longevity. So looking at CLFs versus CRFs. So we've got on the left side of our screen, we've got the continuous liquid feed system, water soluble, and then we've got on the right side, we've got controlled release fertilizers. So I just want to, the first bullet point there I've already touched on. That's kind of the crux of this, is that CLFs are not providing nutrition post-production while CRFs are. But there's some other things in play here that are worth mentioning and talking about a little bit. So one of those being CRFs, overall are a more efficient system, right? With a water-soluble system, coming with irrigation, you've got, you're going to have some overspray, even if you've got pot-to-pot situation. If you're watering too much, you could be leaching some of that nutrients on the ground. You could be having overspray. With a CRF, you are likely incorporating that into your potting mix, and so you've got all of your nutrients right there in the root zone that's being kind of microdosing that nutrients as it gets watered, and that nutrient is there whether regardless of watering. And so that, of course, the nutrients is not needed with the irrigation system because it's always in the container. And so, other than just being efficient, it's just a really, it's a less complex system, CRFs versus CLFs, because on the left side there in the pictures, if you're a grower, you're probably very likely with this, very familiar with this system. It's pretty complex. You've got to have pumps, and you've got your tanks, and you've got to make sure your tanks are mixed properly, and everything is calibrated correctly. You can have issues with that actual nutrient delivery system, unless you have to really stay on that. You can have issues without really knowing it until it might be a little bit too late, and you've got to correct. And so it's just a simpler process for CRFs, because if you're mixing your own system, you've got a soil line like what's pictured here. It's really just an added hopper, right? You would mix it like you would your dolomite or your gypsum. It gets incorporated into your mix, and then that's it. That's your fertility there. And there's easy ways to come back and do things like pearl counts, and to calibrate. You still have to calibrate the machine, right? It's still have that to deal with, but that's pretty standard. And then you can be checking by pearl counts, and you can visually see the fertilizer in the root zone as well. So I have to talk a little bit about our technologies. These are the technologies that are going to be in the research that for today. We've got another technology as well. We play in the ag space additionally, but these are our two leading technologies for the horticulture market. And so these would be Galaxy One and NutriCoat. I'll start in that middle section there. Some things that both of these technologies have in common. Both of them are going to be 100% coated prills. And so some technologies, you might have an NPK pearl, and then you've got your micronutrient pearls, and they may coat those. These would be more like kind of your economical or budget fertilizers. Those might be coated separately, and then they're blended in. Or you might have your NPK coated and the micros are not. Both of these technologies are going to have everything as 100% fully. The pearls are homogeneous, so every pearl has your NPK, your secondary macros, and your micros all in one pearl, and then it's all coated the same. Both these technologies are going to have durable and consistent durable coatings that are going to give you predictable and consistent release patterns from batch to batch. And then both of these can grow wide range of crops in their standard pearl size, but are both available in a smaller mini pearl for things like propagation and really small cell packs. Galaxy One technology over on the left, the name, as the name implies. This one, kind of cool fact we like to tell people. This one was actually developed with the help of NASA scientists, and so pretty cool. I don't think every CRF company gets to say this, but both of our products have actually been used in space. So pretty neat reality there. For Galaxy One, the longevity is actually dictated by the coating thickness. And so for a lower longevity, like a 70-day or a 90-day, it's a lower total coat weight, so thinner coating, versus if you have a 360-day product, that coating thickness is going to be a thicker coating. Whereas NutriCoat, on the other hand, and Galaxy One is made here in the United States. It's actually made in Florida. NutriCoat is made over in Japan. We bring all of that material in. That's done in a really automated process, with really unrivaled quality and consistency on how that's made. Their substrate is made there in-house. But that coating thickness is actually, it's all the same. So the coating is a pretty thick coating on NutriCoat. And whether you've got a 70-day product or a 360-day product, that coating thickness will be the same. They have a proprietary release agent that actually dictates that release. So the word is out. This concept of improving plant quality and extending shelf life is not something, of course, that just we as a company are talking about. And CRFs in this space and how they differ from water solubles. I would encourage you to, not just take our word for it, but to kind of, go and do your own homework. There's a lot of good material out there for CRFs. And if you look at, I've seen some data that shows, like how popular CRF searches are over the past couple of decades, and they're certainly growing in popularity among this market. So on the, what's showing here on the left side of your screen is a third-party academic paper where they grew up poinsettias under a CLF system and a CRF system. and show that you can produce really good quality plants that are and show that the economics are actually favorable under the controlled release fertilizer system versus the water soluble one. They've got all that math laid out really nicely there. And then on the right side is just an example of one talking about the benefits of controlled release fertilizers for the retail space and maintaining that plant quality like we're talking about. So of our two-pronged approach, that was kind of our nutrition primer. And then we've got water relations, right? So we want to protect retail plant quality by enhancing bioavailable water. And so when you hear me talk about bioavailable water or bioavailable nitrogen or bioavailable nutrients, we say that bioavailable because both nutrients and water can be in the plant. They may be present, but they may not be readily available to the plant. So we want to focus on the portion of each that is readily available for the plant. If it's not available, it's not doing any good, right? So a quick primer on our substrates. Peat, we're all probably very familiar with peat. It's the most widely used substrate, for this space. Peat has this natural, like, waxy cuticle, right, that actually repels water. Overall, peat is hydrophobic. It doesn't really like water. It can take a while for it to wet up and then re-wet once it becomes dry. And so if you're using peat, it's very likely you're using a surfactant or a wetting agent, right? That's used for the initial wetting, but also for the wet and dry cycles that substrate, that plant is going to have. So the surfactants can help it re-wet once it dries out. Surfactants, particularly if you're living in a really hot climate or you irrigate a lot, those surfactants, you get different longevity out of those surfactants. And so if the surfactant kind of runs out, it can be difficult for that peat to re-wet by itself. So, in that retail space, when you have these dry down situations, because you kind of just have to assume they're going to occur, right? At some point, that's very likely that plant is going to get skipped or it's not going to get the adequate water that it needs. And so not only do you want that plant to have reduced effects and delayed wilt effects, right? Because if they have options, and they do, people usually aren't going to choose the really wilted looking plant. They're going to choose the healthy looking one, right? So we want that plant to delay wilt effects. We also, when the wilt happens and that plant does dry down and gets re-wetted, we want it to re-wet well, right? We know that plant gets really dried out and then it gets watering. It really needs to be watered a little bit differently than a plant that's got a decent amount of water. And so it really needs to be watered in slowly. Otherwise, that water can just kind of channel right through that container and not really seep into that mix and be available for plant roots. And so that re-wetting cycle or reality is really important as well. So that was peat. Perlite. Perlite has been around for a long time. Perlite is added to add porosity or airspace to a mix. Roots, of course, need to breathe, and so you need to provide that airspace. But perlite is nuanced several ways. It's dusty. It adds airspace, but it does not hold on to a whole lot of bioavailable water. So Hydrofiber is our proprietary wood-based substrate. It's been on the market for about a decade. Made quite an impact in the market. It's a peat and primarily a perlite replacement. It offers porosity while also offering water retention. And so you can add porosity, airspace for plant roots without sacrificing your water retention, right? Your water holding capacity. And then Hydrofiber is going to release that water to the plant when it needs it. And so Hydrofiber, compared to perlite, peat, or core, has more bioavailable water and is also a more cost-effective solution in offering different business efficiencies. So what's pictured here on your screen here is what we call a float test. And so this is 100% peat, and this is 100% Hydrofiber over here on the right side. And so with a float test, it's simply you're putting the same amount of known substrate in water, and then in the same amount of time, you see how much has submerged and how much is still floating on top. And so you can see that only 99% of this is floating on top. So that means that it's having trouble wetting in, and 98% of the Hydrofiber has sunk down because it's taken on that water like you would want it to. And so you got to kind of picture that in that mix, and that's the benefit that you're getting. So enhancing bioavailable water. So an 80% peat, 20% perlite mix. Peat-lite mix is a very common, has been a common mix for a long time. This graph is showing that if you were to take that same mix, 80% peat, but you completely replace the perlite with Hydrofiber, you're automatically going to see about a 10% increase in bioavailable water for your plant roots. And so that's at an 80-20. A common substrate for our growers, our customers, is going to be somewhere closer to a 60% peat, 40% hydrofiber. And so you've got to think that not only are you with that switch to that mix, you're getting an economic benefit, and that you're replacing some of that peat and perlite, those costlier substrates, with hydrofiber, but you're also getting better properties. You're getting increased, still getting the water holding capacity that your plants need, and then increasing that airspace as well. And so hydrofiber again has been out, I said, for about 10 or 11 years now. It is the leading wood fiber substrate on the market. This is always beneficial that our product is made entirely here in the U.S., particularly right now with tariffs and our global kind of state of our economy right now. That's just a benefit that's being even further realized by the market. This is made in primarily in North Carolina at our plant. It's a thermally refined process, patented process that under high temperature and high pressure, we take pine chips and we create these long, thin fibers that have this large surface area that hold more water than peat, and still getting that porosity and more bioavailable water than perlite. So these things, come into play, and that's why you can go on our website and see lots of case studies and claims about the benefits of hydrofiber for roots, faster, improved rooting, just improved water management properties. That just the nature of how these fibers work in their surface area. Okay, so that's kind of the setup here of what we're looking at. So when we started this research, we kind of asked ourselves this big overarching question, can our technologies, can profile technologies protect retail plant quality, right? Loaded question. So we broke this research down into kind of three main areas, right? And those are the areas that we're going to talk about today. So the first of these being our mass balance trial. And that's really was an in-depth look at release profiles between our top two products, in Galaxy One and NutriCoat, versus our top competitors, right? So really getting at which CRF is going to offer the best sustained nutrition for the plant's full sales cycle: production, retail, consumer experience. 2 out of 3 was our CRF versus CLF trials. So those were just looking at our core CRF products versus a water-soluble system, and then which one of those is having a better impact on retail plant quality. And then the third and final one we're going to talk about today is our substrate and nutrition drought stress trial. And that was evaluating this kind of historic peat perlite mix under a CLF and a CRF system versus our 60-40 peat hydrofiber mix also under CRF and CLF, to see which one provided a better wilt stress mitigation, right? Which ones maintain quality better when under those wilt stress conditions. So a little sneak peek here. These are pictures actually from this research. I put this up here also as kind of a reminder to kind of ask you as we go through the slides here to put your consumer hat on, right? I would imagine probably everybody on this call has purchased a plant in the retail space before. And so, be thinking about that as you're kind of judging between these pictures, and think about, which plant would you be choosing, spending your money on, or which plant would you be leaving there on the shelf that is more likely to end up in that shrink category, right? So spoiler alert, plants on the bottom were actually our technologies versus the top row there as the controls for standard industry practice. Okay, so this is the mass balance trial, section kind of 1 of 3 here. So I'll first start by saying mass balance, kind of what do we mean by that? It's not a terminology that we hear every day. In a mass balance system, you're simply measuring everything that's put into the system, and then you're measuring everything that comes out of the system. So we wanted to measure everything super well, and talk a little bit more about that. But again, we looked at our fertilizers versus our top competitors. Again, kind of spoiler alert, our key takeaways from this research trial was that One, we did see significant release profile differences, and NutriCoat was the most consistent in total nutrient release across all the nutrients that we looked at. Of those, it more often than the others had the best release. And then when looking on a cost per bioavailable nitrogen, NutriCoat and Galaxy One, both of our technologies, actually offered the best value. And so, being this was a mass balance trial, we wanted to look at, again, all of the essential nutrients that are in these fertilizers, right? So fertilizer companies, it's very common when you see release curves put out, those are usually based on nitrogen or they're based on total salt load, right? It's not very common for to see what's the release profile look like of phosphorus or potassium or iron or any other nutrients, right? And so that's what we wanted to look at. So this was a pretty thorough, in-depth study. We did these in 1.5 liter containers, and we did these fallow, right? So there was no plants involved in this research. Though we mixed up the containers and added gypsum and lime and all the things as if they were going to grow plants, as you would as a grower. But we didn't put the plants in because, of course, they would be taking out nutrients. We wanted to be able to measure everything closely, and again, what was put out and what was put in. So a lot of leachate was captured for this. We captured everything that came out of these pots and sent it to a lab to look at everything really closely. And we did this under 3-year applications, and we did this in 2 different areas, right? When you see nutrient release curves from fertilizers, they're done under controlled environments at a constant temperature. So we did that at a constant temperature of 70, and then we did these in a greenhouse in North Carolina, which had an average daily temperature of 71, but that included fluctuating temperatures, cooler temperatures down into, I think we had upper 50s, up into like upper 80s, right? We started this in July, and then it went into the winter. So what we're going to look at here, not to be, don't check out on me here, and not to be overwhelmed by the graphs, we're going to look at a few nutrient release curves, but these are important to kind of be able to measure CRFs against each other, right, and kind of tell the story. So kind of setting up these graphs for us on the vertical axis, we've got our percent nutrient release. In this case, we're looking at nitrogen, and then we've got our days at the bottom, right? And then you can see here is our key. We've got our NutriCoat technologies in brown, and then our Galaxy One technology is in green, and then our competitors are the blue, dark gray, and yellow. So you can see here, how are we defining success on these graphs? You want, as a grower, of course, you're paying for this fertilizer, so you're wanting it to do the work for you, of course, right? And so you're wanting that nutrients to release from that prill, feed your plants. And we're going to focus in on that production cycle, right? Like we first need to grow a good quality plant, and then we need to think about having enough nutrition left over for that retail phase and then into the consumer experience phase, right? And so what we don't want to see is like, in day 7, that's why we include days 1 through 7 on here. We want to make sure that we don't have if you had 100% release on day 7, that would not be good, right? We want the nutrient to release. We want it to release the appropriate timing. We want it to carry us through that full sales cycle for that plant, right? And so you can see here on the graphs I'm going to show you the most amount of release is how we're going to measure success. And so you can see here that NutriCoat and Galaxy, this is at the 70 degrees controlled environment in the lab, releasing the most nitrogen, so in that 1 and 2 position. The next graphs I'm going to show you, the next 3 or 4 slides are going to be set up the same way. And so this is actually the last graph that I showed you, but for easy viewing and just looking at our top products and our top competitors, the last slide, we looked at our technologies at different longevities, and we looked at our competitors in different longevities as well. But we focused out on the top ones for this, and that's the ones we're going to focus in on now. So in setting these slides up, this top kind of boxed area is reading this by saying, again, this is look at nitrogen, but you're reading this by saying NutriCoat gives you this much more nitrogen release than the CRFs over here. So NutriCoat in this case giving 59% more nitrogen release than competitor A, 31% more than B, and 44% more than C, right? So overall, NutriCoat and Galaxy providing more nitrogen in that lab condition and consistently across both conditions, right? So not only you want your CRF, that they are dictated by temperature and moisture, you want that to be not have these wide ranges, right, where you get like a lot of release, a big difference in release by small changes in temperature. And so I point out that NutriCoat and Galaxy are around 45-ish% here in this condition, and in the mid 50s in this condition, whereas some of these competitors like this one here is 60 in this condition. It actually was the top one in the greenhouse condition, but it's 30% here under this condition. So you want to see consistency in your CRFs as well. So that was nitrogen, or we're going to look at NPK. And so this is phosphorus. And so you can see here, again, in both conditions, NutriCoat outperforming all other products under both conditions, all the way up to 135% more phosphorus than one competitor, down to 20 and 30% more than some others. Potassium. So looking at our big three here, you can see competitor C is in that top spot, but followed fairly closely by NutriCoat and Galaxy at that 2 and 3 position. So we're looking at NPK in total, our big three, NutriCoat and Galaxy both performing super well. I include iron. This will be our last curve we're going to look at. But I include iron because as we're talking about plant quality and overall plant tone, all these nutrients, they're essential nutrients, right? So the plant needs them. They all do their things. If we're thinking, though, about foliar tone and plant color and that being, a factor in people's minds in a reality for overall plant quality, nitrogen, does get the most attention. We're going to see those effects pretty quickly, and we're likely going to see those first. Iron is another one, though, that the iron deficiencies, you get this interveinal chlorosis. It can show up pretty quickly and can really impact overall plant color. And so you want to have chelated iron. You want to have good iron availability. And this is really showing that in both of our technologies. You can see NutriCoat and Galaxy taking the 1 and 2 spots here. And then NutriCoat honestly really blowing out the competition up to almost 900% and almost 250% more than the competition. And so this graph, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. This is just kind of showing of these other areas that we looked at of just the NPK. This is showing we did this research on all nutrients, and this is kind of the summary. Overall, key takeaway here is that NutriCoat released more nutrition at a more consistent rate during crop production, and then well into that consumer experience phase, right? This slide I am going to camp out on for a bit because it's an important one. So, aptly titled "Economics Favor the Use of NutriCoat and Galaxy One." That would be over our competitors, and so kind of break down the slide for us in this graph chart. What we did is looked at bag costs, and we tried to be fair of what mid to large growers would be paying for their per bag. So we looked at the per bag cost, but what's important in looking and deciding upon CRFs is really not just looking at that per bag cost. You really got to take it a couple steps further. It's not really complicated, but you've got to factor in your percent release on that, and then you can, from that, you can dictate how much nitrogen is actually in that, because that's a big driver of that cost. And so you can then get like a cost per pound of nitrogen, but that's a better way to look at it. But then taking that a step further, again, that you're paying for that fertilizer to do the work for you and release those nutrients. And so you've got to think about what is actually being released and available to the plant. And that's where we're looking at this in kind of a different way and trying to help folks see that when you look at this on a pounds per bioavailable nitrogen, so that's your cost of nitrogen in that bag, but then what's actually being released and available, that's where you can put this cost on cost per bioavailable nitrogen. So when you look at that on both our technologies, that's where how we're saying that NutriCoat and Galaxy are the more favorable, more cost-effective solutions. Comparing that to, the next closest one would be $18 per pound, all the way up to $23 and $27 per pound of bioavailable N. So if you've got a NutriCoat bag cost up in the, even mid or even high 60s, this would be how much that bag cost would cost you on this competitor if you're looking at actual, bioavailable nitrogen, or like think about this as like calories like per plant that you're offering. So that's the end of section 1. I'm going to jump into section 2. So this is going to be our core CRF technologies versus a continuous liquid feed system in the greenhouse. So, under the premise again that nutrition is preserving foliar tone and for overall plant quality. So this perception that darker green leaves are going to be perceived as higher quality plants to the consumer, whereas light green leaves are going to be more perceived as unhealthy or less quality plant. So key takeaways here. Again, we kind of needed a metric to kind of measure this, right? So that's where we picked nitrogen. We felt like that was a reliable metric, and based on our data, it's not a perfect system, but we did feel that it was an accurate way to assess plant quality. Again, higher N values translating into greener, healthier looking plants. Another couple key takeaways here: NutriCode and Galaxy One, both proving superior to CLF system at maintaining nitrogen in plant tissues in that retail space. And then also both in a variety of container sizes, showing their utility. And so in these trials, we had 3 trials that all took place in 2024. We grew these out in 804 packs, in 4-inch pots, and 10-inch hanging baskets. And so we did CRF rates from 2, 4, 6, and 8 pounds per cubic yard, and compared all of these to a CLF system at 125 parts per million nitrogen. You can see we grew these out early, mid, late season, 6 different crop species. And then we looked at nutrient leaf analysis of all your nutrients. We took quality ratings, growth indices, and then pictures. And we did this at every data collection time, of which we had 4. And so we did this, grew the plants out to normal finish times, which we called retail ready. And then we did a week after, 2 weeks after, and 3 weeks after. And so the pictures that I am going to show you now, we're going to look at some graphs with some pictures. This first one, we're going to go in kind of order from container size. So these are packs, and we're going to focus in on 2 weeks past retail ready. And so the way these graphs are set up, you've got your percent nitrogen over here on your vertical axis, and then you've got your weeks past retail ready. So this would be 0. So this would be like at retail ready. So plants just getting out of the greenhouse and just getting into the retail space. And then 1, 2, 3 weeks after. You got your CLF line is always going to be your blue one. And then you got your NutriCode rates, or your gray and black, and then your Galaxy One rates are your yellow and brown. So you can see all across the production phase and into the retail space, your nitrogen level is the lowest on your CLF. And then we're going to focus in here on this 2-week mark. And so that's, example of what this plant's going to look like at that 2-week mark. You're actually seeing probably, I would argue, more phosphorus deficiency here. You can see this plant is kind of starting to peter out a little bit. Galaxy actually had the highest N rates. I would argue, and this is where I say, this is a reliable metric using nitrogen, but it's not a perfect system. You can see a little bit of deficiency here in this Galaxy plant, but still overall, this pack looking better than the water soluble. But even though nitrogen a little bit lower on NutriCode compared to Galaxy, I would say this plant's overall looking better. This slide, don't get too hung up on the right side. This is really just kind of summarizing. This was a really in-depth study, lots of container sizes, lots of plant species, but we went through here and we looked at plant nitrogen levels at these different phases, right, to try to see where is this threshold value, right? And of course you have differences in plant species, but we went through and looked at all of our data and compared that against plant analysis handbooks that say what the level should be for the different species. And while that's going to vary, we basically came up with 2.9% nitrogen as our kind of level. So below that being not so great, above that being where we want to be, right? So basically we highlighted anywhere with this yellow orange color, anywhere that was below the 2.9 level. We saw that most often under the CLF system. So the key takeaway on this slide is that if you look at a 2-week period from retail ready to 2 weeks post, thinking about that plant possibly sitting there for 2 weeks, or maybe it's there for a week, but you've got to think about that week for the consumer experience, right? So in that 2-week period, you've got 34% less leaf nitrogen in your CLF system versus if you were on a NutriCode, if you used entirely NutriCode, 4 pounds per cubic yard, you would see 17% less leaf nitrogen. So another way to look at that would be you've got half the amount of degradation in leaf tissue nitrogen when you use when NutriCode was used versus CLF in this data. So again, we're going to look at, this is set up the same way. We're going to look at 4-inch containers. These are geraniums. And so this is, again, picture here would be 2 weeks post retail ready. So you can see, again, your CLF is your lowest nitrogen value. And then your CRFs are kind of, I would average that right around probably 3.5%. So you can see that playing out here pretty nicely. You can see a lot of deficiency on this overhead view of the CLF plant. You see a tad bit of deficiency in the Galaxy example, and then a much darker overall tone in this NutriCoat plant. And I've got some side-by-side pics to kind of see this played out a little bit more. This is your CLF on the left and your CRF NutriCoat at 4 pounds per cubic yard. So, again, pay attention to overall plant color and then flower color, flower intensity. This would be the same thing, but bumping up that NutriCoat rate to 8 pounds per cubic yard. So no deficiency seen here. Overall, like really great looking plant, especially compared to this water soluble example. And that would be all three against each other. So again, same story here. But this would be 4-inch pansies 3 weeks post retail ready. So we're able to maintain quality with hydrofiber and our CRFs even that far out after retail ready. So again, you can see this plant starting to peter off under a water soluble. No sustained nutrition. Galaxy One example here, 5% leaf tissue nitrogen even after still a bang up a really good looking plant. So moving into 10-inch, I'm trying to go a little faster here for the sake of time, but moving into 10-inch, summarized the same way. Overall, same story, right? You're getting half the amount of leaf tissue degradation, nitrogen degradation when CRFs are used versus that water soluble. So you really see these effects of maintaining plant quality play out even more so. It's more dramatic differences in the larger container sizes. So excited about this section with the 10-inch. These are impatiens, again, 2 weeks after. Again, on the left side is your water soluble. You can see you're less than 2% nitrogen. Over here, using Galaxy One at 4 pounds per cubic yard. Again, so we're just below that threshold, but still looking really good. Really good foliar color, a lot more flowers, a lot more blooms. That plant's starting to spill over that container. This is Galaxy One at 8 pounds per cubic yard. So also, really great looking plant. These will be all three compared. And this is the first slide where I'm showing you. We also took quality ratings. And so we basically, it's a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being poor quality, 5 being the best. And so you can see here your CLF plant got a 2, and then both of these getting a 3.5 in quality. Same deal under geraniums. This would be your geranium under the water soluble, and this would be NutriCoat at 4 pounds per yard. Much darker green, a lot more blooms, good flower color. This would be NutriCoat at 8 pounds per cubic yard. And then all three compared. Again, your quality ratings, you've got a 3 versus a 4.5, and then a perfect 5 in the 8-pound rate. This is probably my favorite. These are Caliber Cobras, and this is even 3 weeks after retail ready. So again, on the left side is your water soluble, really awesome looking plant. You can barely see the container, even at just 4 pounds per cubic yard of NutriCoat. And then when you bump that up to just 6 pounds per cubic yard, you can't even see the container, that much more flowering. And this will be all three together. So perfect 5 here, a 4 here, and a 2.5 on quality ratings. So our third and final section is our substrate and nutrition drought stress trials. So these are run the same way as the previous trials. However, we intentionally drought stress these. So in that retail, we simulated the retail space that at that retail ready point, these plants were all grown just under clear water, right? So the CLF system is not continuing to feed where the CRF is. But these, we drought stressed intentionally. And so we got them to retail ready, and we cut the water off until we saw wilt across the board without any plant death. And then we re-wetted everything with the same amount of water and took ratings again. And then we drought stressed them for a second and final time. And so I'm going to show you pictures at both of those stages. The key takeaways, though, again, we did this for the 80-20 peat perlite mix and the 60-40 peat hydrofiber mix. Overall, hydrofiber was superior in delaying wilt stress than the standard perlite mix. The NutriCoat fed plants did show delayed wilting compared to the water-soluble plants. The combination of NutriCoat and hydrofiber provided the best protection from drought stress, showing that NutriCoat and Hydrofiber are an effective strategy for improving sell-through at retail when drought stress is common. So I've already showed this slide, but I flash it back up just to kind of jog our memories that the benefits of Hydrofiber here in allowing for porosity and airspace while retaining water and being able to release that water and offering bioavailable water is what we're going to see kind of play out here. So these pictures, I'm going to show you 4 pictures kind of sequentially and compare them against each other. But this is the end of our first dry down. So you are going to see the effects of the wilt stress kind of play out here. So this first picture, top left, is our perlite and CLF treatment. And so you can see pretty widespread wilt stress, right? Moving to the right is going to be still the CLF fertility, but when the Hydrofiber mix is used instead of perlite. And so you can see, you might see a little bit of wilt stress in this group, but overall, much better looking plants, holding up much better to the wilt stress. Now going down, we're gonna have the same perlite mix, but we're gonna see what these look like when CRF is used instead of water soluble. And you can see there, you can still see a little bit of wilt stress, but overall these plants look a lot better than that top left picture. And so our biggest comparison here is going to be the next one, and that's the Hydrofiber and CRF mix versus that perlite and that CLF mix. And so overall, these plants, very little wilt stress observed, really good quality plants at the end of this first dry down. And so now let's look at some really stressed plants. This is going to be that second final dry down, and this is 5 days after water. We are not suggesting that you intentionally go that far, right? This is in North Carolina. We had some shady, cooler weather, and so that's why we were able to get 5 days. Had to go that long. If you were outside in Florida, these plants wouldn't even look this good after 5 days no water. But these pictures will be set up the same, and so you can see these plants look really stressed, really feeling that lack of water there playing out in that perlite and CLF system. Moving over to the right, this is the impact of the Hydrofiber you're seeing. So still CLF, but Hydrofiber going down now, looking at that same mix, but when CRF is in play, you can still see a little bit of wilt stress, but overall mitigating that much better than the top left here. And then again, our bigger comparison when Hydrofiber and CRF are both used, this would be NutriCoat and Hydrofiber. A big difference between that top left picture and that bottom right. So I know that was a lot. Hopefully we were all able to keep up. I know I'm talking fast here, trying to get through quite a lot in what's not really a lot of time. But our key takeaways here, just going back to that original question, right, is do our technologies offer a solution in protecting retail plant quality? We felt, after all this research, is that was a resounding yes. CRF's RFR superior solution to protecting retail plant quality, extending that sales window, offering a lot of benefits while also being a more cost-effective strategy, right? So, and Floracan CRF technology is being a more cost-effective solution for delivering bioavailable nitrogen. And then NutriCoat offering the best nutrient release profiles of any CRF on the market. Hydrofiber also showing its value over peat perlite mixes in this research by increasing bioavailable window, extending that wilt stress window at retail. And then again, hopefully showing to you all that Hydrofiber and NutriCoat is a winning combination to protecting retail plant quality and increasing sell-through and helping growers increase their profitability. So thank you for your attention, and I think we'll turn it over to questions now.
All right, thank you, Brandon. We have had quite a few questions come in, so we'll get to as many as we can during, I just need to add more time here. I'll get to as many as we can during the time that we have. And if we don't get to your question, the folks at Profile Products we have your email, they'll follow up and try to get everything answered. But the first question is, have you tested CRF in cold and hot climates?
Yeah, so this was done, our greenhouses are in North Carolina, so it's a pretty temperate climate where we can do things in the summer to replicate that hotter environment, or in the cooler parts of the year. We have widespread use of our CRFs as well, like across the country and even internationally as well. So we've got a lot of grower data as well. Everything that was presented today was the grower trials were started in the summer, and when I went through fall, I take that back. The comparison trials where we did CRF versus water soluble were each done spring, mid-season, and late season. But short answer, yeah, we've got it across different climates.
Okay. All right. Our next question is: do you completely replace peat and perlite with hydrofiber?
So peat is you can completely replace perlite with hydrofiber. Peat, that's kind of an inclusion rate question. So I think there's kind of probably a couple questions within that one question. Inclusion rates for hydrofiber, are common to be in that 30 to 50% range. Again, like what was done in these trials, it was 60% peat and 40% hydrofiber. That's a very common mix for a lot of our growers, and so you're getting cost efficiencies. You're getting that benefit. The hydrofiber still offering water retention, bioavailable water, and airspace. And we have other data showing kind of the physical properties between that and like an 80-20 peat perlite mix. But we have growers go above 50% inclusion rate successfully. There's with anytime you're adjusting your soil mix, more than just like maybe 5% or so, there are some maybe extra steps just in how you would water, but we are fully equipped as a team to kind of come alongside you and help you with what those would look like. But yeah, certainly can go above 50% on the inclusion rate with hydrofiber.
Okay. All right. Next one is: do you recommend to incorporate any natural wetting agents or surfactants for re-wetting challenges?
Yeah, overall, we still, because again, you're going to have, it's primarily your hydrofiber is going to still have peat in it. And so we still recommend growers to use wetting agents, but you're going to get better re-wetting and overall just re-wettability with the hydrofiber. Okay. And you're going to see that play out even more so, to an extent with your increase rate versus peat is harder to re-wet just by itself. Yeah, that's for sure. This is probably our last question. It might be a little long answer, I'm not sure, but how did PGR use vary with CRF and CLF? Yeah, right. So really good question. So, and that's something that across the board, I think can be elucidated even further. But we grew out crops. We try to follow the standard where we get our genetics. We try to follow the standard like cultural management practices. So, if it calls for PGRs, we will use them. If it doesn't, we won't. And so while that's not always a perfect case, depending on what trial we are doing, PGRs would still be utilized in the same way. And so you would choose your CRF based on what you're growing and what your end goals are, and so you can adjust accordingly, right? Depending on what longevity of CRF you're using. I would say broadly speaking, you're still going to use your PGRs, but you may be able to dial those back or adjust those a little bit depending on your CRF usage. Okay. All right. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time. With it, but you said there's a lot of nuances with that. Yeah. So without getting into a whole lot of side rows and over for the sake of time, but so essentially, work with your consultant, right? Work with your our sales team, great sales team, and a great technical team that comes alongside growers and really helps guide them with this whole process and works with them. Okay. All right. Perfect. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have. We had quite a few other questions, so I know you'll probably get an email in the next few days contacting you with an answer or follow up. But I want to thank Brandon White so much for the information. It was a great webinar, good information. And I also want to thank Profile Growing Solutions for making the webinar possible. You can rewatch all or parts of this webinar at the same link you used to log on today.
You'll also get an email tomorrow about this time with a link to the on-demand webinar. So lots of ways to rewatch it if you have any desire to go back and recheck the information. So thank you everybody for attending. And again, thanks to Brandon and to Profile Products.
Thank you, Robin. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. All right. Have a good day, everyone.
Y'all too.